Okay, so I'm going to talk about CalTIA to you today, and I'm going to try to do it in these 20 slides I have here. As she said, I'm Larry Goodson of the Department of National Security and Strategy, her and my department. I'm with, this year, the first ever Seminar 25, and so that's my group. Yeah, there's my Marine right there. He's got a beard now, but he's still a Marine. And we introduced this into the curriculum about 8 years ago, if I'm remembering correctly. And our intent, as I understood it then, was twofold. First, we wanted other non-Western theorists of war beyond Sun Tzu, which you're going to read in conjunction with CalTIA for your next class, right? To help our students, you folks, develop a wider aperture about human thought on war. And so to that end, various of us, including me, were asked, well, who would you add? You know, you teach the Middle East, you teach South Asia, who would you add? I said, well, CalTIA, the Arthashastra. I mean, everyone should read it. And Tammy's predecessor, several times removed, at the time was also a CalTIA fan, and one thing led to another. We added it, and then for my good deed of suggesting it, I was given this lecture to deliver. So I've delivered it, well, not while I was at Oxford, but the other times since then. I would add, by the way, if you want to consider the thought of non-Western theorists, right, you might consider Genghis Khan. He was a practitioner, as well as someone who shaped warfare. Mao Zedong, who was a practitioner and a shaper of warfare. Khalid ibn Walid, the greatest general in history, never lost a battle. 100 battles, didn't lose any of them. Good record. Hassan Isaba, Miyamoto Musashi. I mean, there's a number of others you could consider if you're thinking non-Western theorists of warfare. However, the second reason for me was the reason I thought we should introduce CalTIA, and that is that he's a statecraft theorist. He's not really a war theorist. I mean, he is a war theorist, but that's only one instrument in the toolkit, right, of power. The military, and there's the other aspects of the dime or the broader toolkit of instruments of power to achieve the interests of the state. Most of us in this room grew up believing that Niccolo Machiavelli was the great statecraft theorist. He wrote The Prince, he wrote The Art of War, right? Another Art of War, not Sun Tzu's Art of War. And in many respects, as Max Weber said, compared to the Arthashastra, the Prince is harmless. This is the pure distillation of statecraft theory. This is the guy that tells you all the things you don't even want to think about in your nightmares that maybe the ruler has to do to achieve the interests of the state. And this, if you were a little bit frustrated this morning, perhaps, I would never dare say this at the U.S. Army War College, with Clausewitz on some levels as a comprehensive theorist, because he gave you bits and pieces, but the text is really a bit of this and then a bit of that, and it's jumping around, right? This is a comprehensive theory of statecraft. I'm going to give you the main components of that theory, and then you can make up your own minds as whether or not I'm correct about that. I'm also going to do something. And I saw the provost come in the room, so now I have to disavow that I'm going to do this when there's people in the chain of command. You know, we don't give answers. We're paid to ask you a lot of questions and then look thoughtful as you as you answer those questions in the seminar room, but I'm going to give you answers on Kautilya because this year we moved away. My colleague who did this lesson while I was away has moved away from a secondary source. We used to use Roger Boucher's article, which is a very good article, but now you're reading sections of the Arthashastra. All right? It is a dense, complex book in 15 books, and then a bunch of chapters within those books. It's hard reading. It's translated from the Sanskrit, and so it's hard to even know if the translation is, there are multiple translations and which one is correct and all that. I'm going to give you answers that, for example, you could use on a comprehensive examination, should you be asked a question about war. And should you think that Kautilya gives you answers that you would want to offer. So, Jim, pretend you didn't hear that, and that's what I intend to do. So let me advance the slides. I'm going to go as quickly as I can. Oh, we don't have slides now. Where'd they go? Oh, I guess we have to do this. Hopefully they'll come back. So, very quickly, to Tammy's point, I have been a practitioner, as you can see from the photo, although that was a long time ago. I don't do that kind of work anymore. No, I was doing my dissertation research back in the 80s with the Afghan Mujahideen in that photo. The main points I wanted to emphasize, though, is that my professional field is IR, or International Relations Theory. Okay, so this is right up my alley. That's why I knew who Kautilya was, actually, because he's the great realist. So when people say, oh, you're being Machiavellian, they really mean you're being Kautilyan, but they don't know that. They just think Machiavelli is the guy who said the ends justify the means. Kautilya laid out how bad those means could be if you really wanted to achieve your ends. Secondly, as Tammy pointed out, I'm a regionalist, Middle East, South Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India hand. And so I come to this from that regional perspective as well. And third, as you see in the photo, I've spent time in the Great Game, which is straight out of Kautilya, and I'll make that point at the end. So I want to move on. Golly, what is going on with our slides up here? Maybe I need someone to sit up here and make this thing work.
Click on the box.
What's that?
Did you click on the box?
Oh, shoot. I didn't click on the box. All right, let's try to make it work now. I'll try to go quickly between these slides so that it doesn't roll back to that. Seems like in the time I was gone to England, we've added a bunch more of these boxes that you have to type in your pen. Maybe not for you guys, maybe it's just for me. So I'm going to use Aristotle's ancient notion that there are 5 core questions, actually 6, right, in the modern derivation of it. Who, when, where, what, why, and how, or how and why, depending on the order that you think of them in. I'm going to give you those questions for this text. I'm going to give you the answers to those questions, and then at the end I'm going to summarize. Heck, I'm saving you a bunch of reading, actually. So, if I can get through these slides, yeah, thank you, he said. Okay, Kautilya, also known, actually more commonly known as Chanakya in the subcontinent probably than Kautilya, also known by his clan name sometimes as Vishnugupta. You'll see all these names in the text, if you read the whole text, which I don't recommend you do, was a scholar in the ancient subcontinent of India, studied at Taxila, which is in present-day Pakistan, but back in the era before the Common Era, back in the 300s when he lived, this was a functioning university. So he was in the Punjab of Pakistan, that's where Taxila is, and he eventually kind of migrated to sort of almost down to Bangladesh along the Indo-Gangetic plain to Pataliputra in the east, where he made Chandragupta Maurya become the founder of the Mauryan dynasty. Okay? And so he was the kingmaker, or if you want to think of it that way, the prime minister to the king of one of the great dynasties or empires in world history, the Mauryan dynasty. He was the first realist, or at least the one we think of as the first realist, makes the Melian dialogue also look just like a commonplace thing, if you're thinking back to your Thucydides. He lived in the 4th to 3rd century before the Common Era. You see the dates there, and he was in the northern part of the Indian subcontinent. You see the location. So if I can go forward without any problems, you'll see what I just talked about. He started up, let's see if this thing works. They didn't give me one that works here. Well, you see up there under Gandhara where Taxila is located. All right? Spelled a little bit differently there. Yeah, there, someone's got a pointer on it. So you can point up to there. And then you see that he worked his way, thank you, thanks Eric. He worked his way down to the state of Magadha. This is from the Mahajanapada period, from 500 BCE kind of forward into the 300s, which is the period of the 16 great countries or great states listed in early Indian literature. You see them here, Gandhara, Matsya, Kuru. You see these all in capital letters. He comes down here, offers his services to the king of this state, Magadha. The king insults him. So he decides, I'm going to take my man Lambert, only his name was Chandragupta, and I'm going to make him the king. And then we're going to take over everything. And he does. At its height, the Mauryan Empire was one of the largest in the world, with some 50 to 60 million people, or at that time about 1/3 to 40% of the world's population. At its height, that empire also had an army of more than 630,000 men, which would make it the 8th largest army in the world today, albeit without all the bells and whistles that modern armies have. It had a very large segment of its population in the Kshatriya caste, or the warrior caste, if you think of, the Hindu religion. And it's all part of the theory of war and of statecraft that he puts forward. So that's the who, the when, the where. Now, what is the Arthashastra? It is translated in different ways by different authors or translators. Typically, it's the science of politics, but I prefer or of political economy. It's the science of political economy. It's divided into 15 books, and most of them are about domestic politics and the welfare of the people and the economy. Because at the foundation of the strength of the state is the welfare of the people and the economic well-being of the state. So you're going to see that if you read all 15 books. Actually, the second book is the longest, and it's all about the various jobs of what we would consider domestic portions of the state government. Rather than the military or foreign policy. That's in there as well. You see what a lot of it is about. It's the oldest surviving piece of literature of this field from this era, but it's not the only such work. As you know, the ancient Indians, as I assume you know, the ancient Indians wrote a lot of things on, ethics and moral behavior, religion, right? They wrote a famous sex manual that everybody in the West seems to always talk about. I give this lecture, people say, I don't know about the Arthashastra, but I know about the Kama Sutra. I say, yeah, I get it. They wrote a lot of these kinds of manuals. Artha Shastra really has to do with economics and government, which they considered as two of the top two fields of study and fields of endeavor for mankind. It was lost in the 12th century, talked about down through the ages, rediscovered in southern India in a museum. You see the palm leaf pages that were discovered in 1904, published and then translated into English in 1915, and we've had several translations since. It's made a bit of a renaissance in Indian foreign policy thought and national security thought. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. Now, why do I think you folks should be familiar with the Arthashastra? I mean, everyone in here who went to West Point probably studied Clausewitz and Sun Tzu and Jomini and all those people, and you never studied Kautilya. Why are we studying it here? Because it's a manual of statecraft. It's a handbook for the ruler. It's his effort to tell Chandragupta or anyone who is going to be the leader of the ministries to tell that ruler, here is what you do to achieve your national ends in the field of international relations. In shorthand, where are we here? You're going to try to use all elements of the dime to achieve your national interest, not just the military element or instrument of the dime. Now, he did talk about war, largely in books 7 and 10. And I'm going to take you through his theory, starting with war. I'm really going to give you 4 pieces of the theory: Yuddha, Upayas, Sadgunya, and Mandala, or Raja Mandala, all right, in the Hindu or in the Sanskrit words, right? But I'm going to take you through those bits of the theory so that you get the whole theory, and then you can tell me at the end if you think, yeah, this is a comprehensive theory of statecraft. Well, we'll start with war and a couple of foundational pieces. He is a political realist, which means we realists, you're going to get a chance in a forthcoming lecture to talk about, or forthcoming class rather, not the next one, the one after, right, Grace? You're going to look at theories of international relation. And you're going to look at realism, liberalism, maybe constructivism, perhaps several derivations or schools of theory. You're going to look at those. I always tell people, I'm the stone-cold realist at the War College. Got in a big argument, not a big argument, it was a polite discussion, with a famous realist, John Mearsheimer, at Oxford earlier this year over dinner. He was saying, I'm the Prince of Darkness. I said, dude, I give the lecture on Kautilya. I mean, come on. You recommended once that every country should have nuclear weapons. The world would be safer. I got that. But let's take a look at Kautilya. I'm a stone-cold realist. We realists believe you have to make policy based on the way the world is, not the way you want it to be. You have to recognize what's out there and try to achieve your national ends or interests. Okay, you see, I've got references to the strategy formulation. What are we calling it now? Framework that you guys have in your diagram in your rooms. I assume many of you have it up on the wall somewhere. Ends, ways, and means. So you've got to think about your ends in terms of national interest and how to achieve them, not about what's moral or right or wrong. Those things are important, but they're not decisive. Machiavelli was right. The ends justify the means. I mean, to stone-cold realists. Grace is back there going, Larry, I know you. You're not as much of a realist as you make out. But in any event, he is a political realist. He is writing about an anarchic international system. Now, realism in international relations theory is based on the notion that the international system is anarchic. That is, there's no overarching power that can tell all the states or the independent elements what to do, because the states are sovereign, right? They're sovereign, so they have their own authority within their own borders. The Mahajanapada period that you saw that he lives in, for all of you that talked about Clausewitz today in terms of the Napoleonic era, Kautilya is living in this Mahajanapada period where there are these countries that are all fighting each other for who's going to, rule the whole part of northern India. Well, in the end, it turns out to be his guy that rules northern India. And so that's the kind of international system, the sort of strategic environment, if you will, that he lives in. Power is the key to state security. Realists also believe in this. Seek power, it won't let you down. Of course, what did you learn from Thucydides and the Athenians about imperial overreach and abuse of power? Colin Powell's great lesson from that restraint is the ultimate recognition of what you should do with power, is restrain yourself from using too much of it. But anyway, realists believe in power. Now, Kautilya believes the aim of strategy is conquest. That's key to his theory. You'll see it as we go through his theory. This falls into the subset of realism known as offensive realism, and you're going to see that later when you study IR theory. The reason the aim of strategy is conquest is because it is conquer or be conquered, because if you don't conquer, they're going to come and conquer you. So you better conquer them. You can't just defend, because in the end, they're going to find ways to attack you and bring you down. All ways to achieve conquest can be used. In a culture like the ancient Indian culture, where there's a lot of literature on what is right and what is wrong, righteous behavior, some ways are more righteous than others, but all can be used. Economic well-being provides resources to pursue conquest, so that's the means. And war termination or victory happens when all the kingdoms that are out there are conquered. Then you have victory. So, I said I was going to go through his theory. If you've already read ahead, you know he writes about 3 types of war. Actually, he writes about 4 types of war. I'm going to throw that curveball at you right now. Open war, conventional combat, we might call it shock and awe. This is the most righteous. And indeed, as I mentioned in Seminar 25 earlier today, the ancient Indian treatises before the Arthashastra often legislated things you couldn't do in war. We can't all gang up on this guy just because he's a great fighter. It's one-on-one combat, right? Wouldn't be fair to him if we all ganged up on him. We can't fight before dawn. Attacking before dawn's just not quite cricket, you know, just as we say in the UK. Fighting after dusk when you can't see things, generals get shot that way, poor Stonewall Jackson, you know, you don't want to do that either. I mean, there's a whole host of these. There's a whole list of things that are ways to, you know, legislate what is proper in war or to adjudicate what is proper in war. Concealed war, unconventional war, the war of surprise and deception, the colonists against the redcoats at Lexington and Concord, right? Or a million examples that all of you can think of from different historical accounts of wars where surprise and deception were the friend of the weak king or the weak side in a conflict. He also talks about silent war, what we would call covert action, the war of the intelligence agencies in the modern world, where secret agents, often pretty women, he talks about it very clearly, that you should send attractive women to seduce the enemy king or seduce one general and then seduce the other general and then spread rumors back and forth about how they're backbiting each other, right? Or things like that. So the modern day concept of the honey trap or the sparrow school was known and widely advocated and used in the ancient world. And I joked in my seminar about snakes and concubines. The second year I gave this lecture, this is a totally true story and proves that some of you have too much time on your hands. One seminar loved this text and this concept so much that they made a seminar coin that on the one side said Seminar 7 or whatever the group they were, I can't remember. I've got it though. And on the other side had snakes and concubines. Gave me one of their seminar coins. Proves that some people have too much time on their hands. But there's a verse from the text. A single assassin can achieve with weapons, fire, or poison more than a fully mobilized army. Wait a minute. Assassination's illegal. Not for Chanakya Kautilya. Finally, in a different place in the text, there's a verse that you read or will read that lays out these three types of war. In a different place, though, a different verse, he writes about mantra yuddha, or war by counsel, the war of intrigue, or the battle of intrigue. It's where the diplomats are warriors too. Now, Scotty's back there saying, not me, man. No, I know you're not saying that. I always tell people, remember the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Does anyone remember what that was? Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Don't.
End of August 1938.
And what was it?
It was about a secret, there was an official part, an unofficial secret part about the ruling the euro.
Are you from Poland?
Yes, sir.
Oh, well, he knows this better than anybody then. Who made the deal? Who was Molotov? Who was Ribbentrop?
It was the foreigners, the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Russia and from Germany.
Yes, and why did it was the deal that carved up Poland, sadly for Poland. This has been their fate repeatedly in modern history, right? And it was all a sham on the part of the Soviets and the Nazi German leadership. They knew they were going to fight a war. They just used it to buy time and in the process carve up Poland so that when they eventually fought, that part of it would be sort of set aside. It was an unfortunate thing, obviously, for your country. in this notion, as you will see, especially in the way that the Sadgunya is used in context, or in concert with, rather, the Rajamandala, diplomats make these deals all the time. They don't just come in, war's over, and now we're going to have a peace treaty. Diplomats come and do your thing. No, they come in before the war knowing that the treaty is going to be broken in order to set conditions for a better fight when the fight comes. And I always use that example because it's a modern day, I mean, it's actually, a long time ago now, but it's a modern day example of what he talked about in the text. So let me, where did I put the darn thing now? Oh, here it is. Let me move forward to the how. How do you exercise or execute maybe this particular theoretical approach to statecraft in war? As I said, open war is the most righteous, but you can lose a war as easily as you can win it. Doesn't matter if you got more tanks, or to use the language of the Arthashastra, war elephants, because he writes a good section about war elephants. Because let me tell you, war elephants are expensive. And you can't grow one immediately, right? So you never want to commit your war elephants to battle, because what happens if you lose some of them? Well, you're sitting out there saying, this guy is so out of touch with the real world. We got F-35s now. We got aircraft carriers, whole battle groups. We got tanks, big tanks. We got missiles. We got everything. But it's functionally, it's the same thing. These are the main battle tanks of that era. And it doesn't matter if you've got more than General Reed back there, because he can use surprise and deception. He can use silent war. He can use alliances with my enemies. He can defeat me even though I've got a stronger conventional army for open war. Moreover, open war is expensive. It's inherently unpredictable, right? Everyone in history from Shakespeare on back has told us war is risky. Once you loose the dogs of war, I know I'm referencing Julius Caesar now, you don't quite know what's going to happen. You think you know, that's why you let loose the dogs of war, but you don't really know what's going to happen. That would fall into the category of fog that you read about last night, probably. So instead, you should understand your opponent, you should try to outwit him, and to that end, you should use the 4 approaches or the 4 strategies in the 6-fold foreign policy. So let me take you through those. Sorry. I keep pointing here and it's over there. So, in the subcontinent, whenever I give a lecture like this, immediately everyone runs these 4 together. And sometimes you'll see it as Saman or Sana or Sama, but you'll always hear Samadana Bedadanda. You'll always hear it together, because everyone has learned this in the sense of there are 4 ways to influence someone, to coerce someone, to compel someone, all those verbs you've been wrestling with and will continue to wrestle with. They are negotiation or alliances, gifts or compensation, intrigue or trickery, and force or armaments. And you can sort of see that you can run through them sort of in order. If open war is the last thing you want to do, you don't want to go to force. Canada, I want your land. I'm going to attack you tomorrow. Ooh, wait a minute. What if Canada defeats me? That would be a dumb approach. Maybe I should negotiate with Canada. Canada, I'm the United States. I want some of your land. Could you? I hope there's no Canadian in here. I'm just using this as an example, right? But maybe not in the current environment. Maybe I shouldn't use these examples. But Anyway,
Waves not happy.
anyway, I mean, initially, if you're trying to achieve something that you want, you're going to negotiate. Or maybe if you're weak, you're going to make alliances with some other strong countries so that your negotiating position is stronger, or at least your defensive position is stronger. Or maybe you're going to try to use money. Or maybe you're going to send the pretty women with the cobras and all that sort of thing, right? Or whatever your approach to intrigue and trickery is. Or maybe you're going to build up your military and eventually use it, right? These are the approaches. A number of authors have noted that the great international relations theorist of the last century, Hans Morgenthau, one of your favorites, Scotty, wrote 4 main approaches in his classic work, Politics Among Nations. He doesn't use this terminology. He doesn't cite Kautilya, but it's the same, roughly speaking, the same 4 ideas. So these are time-honored approaches that he recommends. Now, he then goes on to say, let's break this down a little further. Is it fair to say, as the U.S. Constitution seems to suggest when it was first written, that there are only 2 conditions, peace and war? Right? Because we have this whole declaration of war concept. We're at peace, and then one day circumstances compel us to declare war on Great Britain. That would be the War of 1812, one of the 5, right? Or on Mexico, or on Spain, or on, in World War I and World War II, the opposing powers that we faced in those wars. Those would be the 5 where we declared war. Are there only war and peace? Kautilya says no, there's 6 forms of policy. Sometimes this is translated as the 6-fold royal policy. All right, but we might think of it as the foreign policy. He says, well, yeah, you can have peace and war, offensive operation. Oh, the war elephants are marching. It's war. Okay. Agreement with pledges. We've made a deal, a treaty. It may not hold, but it's peace, at least for the time. Indifference, okay, if we're strong but we're sitting on the sideline, that's neutrality, making preparations for war. He refers to that as marching, seeking the protection of another. That's obviously a form of alliance. And then the complicated one, and I'm not giving you the Sanskrit words here, making peace with one and waging war with another is double policy. Anyway, that's double policy. That's like advanced policy making. That's like you're in the Game of Thrones now, and you're agreeing with this king, but you're also, oh, Daenerys has dragons. I better agree with her. They trump war elephants every time. The key is your relative power. Whether your king is strong relative to the enemy determines the type of policy that the king can pursue. That brings us to the last bit of the theory, the Raja Mandala. Mandala, right, is a word for circle. Raja is a word for king. So this is the circle of kings. Or again, in the modern context, we could say the circle of states. So your king in this circle is the conqueror. You see my little cleverly drawn blue arrow. That's about how far I can get with slideology, right? But anyway, to the conqueror there. He says in Book 10, Chapter 2, 2 states sharing a common border are intrinsically hostile to each other. Thus, you have the root of what is largely referred to nowadays as an Arab proverb, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, in the Arthashastra. It works like this. I'm going to leave Canada out of the equation because that might start an international incident that I don't intend. Paul, on the other hand, is my next-door neighbor. I want his state, right? Because what are my ends? Conquest, right? Conquer or be conquered. If I don't conquer Paul, Paul is going to conquer me. So who is my natural ally? Michelle, sitting behind Paul, because she is on the other side of the enemy, is my ally. So I go to Michelle and I say, Michelle, my friend, oh, it's great to see you. Let's make a deal. Oh, shades of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Paul is Poland. I'm Nazi Germany. She's Joseph Stalin. Paul's going down. But then what happens when Paul goes down? Who becomes enemies now? Michelle and Larry. We used to get along so well, Michelle. I don't know what happened, but, well, what happened is, of course, the circle of states changed. And remember, at the beginning of the rise of Maurya, Chandragupta, you had 16 countries in the Mahajanapada period, all in northern India. By the end, you had the Mauryan Empire, right? In this fashion of this piecemeal conquering and applying the policy and the strategy in the circumstances based on the relative power and the conditions that exist inside each state. I've sort of walked through this already, but here are the terms using I forgot to put the pagination or the section, sorry about that, in these slides. When I correct these slides, I'll put them in there for these verses here. But his definition of the enemy and the friend, okay? The rear enemy, the rear ally, the neutral kings, and so forth. Then he also talks about the elements of sovereignty. He cites 7 of them. The government, the people, I'm putting this in modern language, the government, the people, the infrastructure, the economy, the military, the ally, and the adversary, or the friend and the enemy. Those are the elements of sovereignty. That's what the king has, or the minister has, in his playbook or his manual. So what am I going to do about Paul? Well, how strong is my government versus my assessment of his? How strong is my economy? Are my people loyal? What if they're not loyal? You know, it's all of those things. Each of these are elements of state. So as I said at the beginning, this is a fairly comprehensive effort to have a theory, not just a checklist, although it's often presented this way, but a theory of how to look at the world, or at least the world that's your immediate neighborhood, maybe. Although, of course, the assassinations of the Greek or the Hellenistic governors that followed Alexander's push into the edges of South Asia, and he left behind, governors. 2 of them were assassinated during Chandragupta's rise when Chanakya was the chief minister, suggesting that they knew about the Greeks, or the Macedonians, however you want to think of that. They knew about that area of the world beyond the subcontinent. He had grander aspirations than just controlling the Indo-Gangetic plain. So, to conclude, why study the Arthashastra? I told you I was going to give you the answers. Here they are. What is war? This is precisely what Chanakya Kautiya says war is. It is a way to increase power. Although, war being risky, by which we mean open war, Dharma Yuddha, the most righteous of war, we're going to use the less risky approaches, which include, of course, peace, building your own country. But defense is not going to be enough, because damn that Paul, he's going to be trying to conquer me if I don't conquer him. Sorry, Paul. As I just said, why do wars occur? Conquer or be conquered. Near the end of the Arthashastra, he says, wars for conquest, and after having conquered the world, the conqueror shall enjoy it. Now, most of the modern interpretations say that by enjoy it, he means rule it justly. That the cool thing is, after I conquer Paul, his people become my people, and I now have the obligation to rule them positively, favorably, justly, or else I'm going to have this problem of a restive population at home, right? And I got to fight Michelle. And then after Michelle, I got to fight the gentleman I don't know. He's not from my seminar behind Michelle. Who are you? Quinn? So first, did you say Quinn? Quentin, I'm sorry. So first, Quentin and I are going to ally against Michelle, of course. And then eventually, after we conquer Michelle and Paul, and I rule both their people, or maybe he rules some of their people, if we're back to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, I'm going to conquer him, right? And then this is the process. How should war be fought? I just said defense of the realm is necessary, but it's not sufficient. I have 4 types of war, or yuddha. I have the upayas, I have sadgunya, I have mandala, I have a lot of ways to conduct statecraft, of which war is a piece of that puzzle. How are wars won? Well, I've also walked you through what he thinks about that. And are there concepts of enduring relevance? This is what I think you've got to ask yourself about all of these early theorists. We talked about it in seminar today with Tony and some of the others there. What are the concepts of enduring relevance from Clausewitz? What's relevant today from Clausewitz? Well, what's relevant from this guy? First place, none of you have ever heard of him. In the well, maybe. Usually that's the case. In the second place, he's from almost 2,500 years ago. In the third place, I skipped over this, but as with Sun Tzu, he's not even one person. We think that there are multiple recensions or revisions to the work. It was in the slide that the work kind of developed over 5 or 6 centuries. So therefore, it's the work of multiple people, although there apparently was a Chanakya Kautilya who did give us the work. So is there anything of enduring relevance? What about hybrid warfare? You've probably heard of that. It's a thing now. I spent a lot of my year at Oxford I'm working on a book looking at whether or not the Syrian war is the first great war of the 21st century. And if so, how that great war might be fought. Since the last 2 great wars, by my definition, I won't bore you with all that. That'll be another lecture, I suppose. Have been highly kinetic major wars, World War I and World War II. Those are the last 2 great wars. So how might this one be fought? So one of the things that I did, including visiting Ukraine for this purpose, was to look closely at hybrid warfare. What is hybrid warfare? It's all the rage now. Everyone's talking about hybrid warfare. Pay attention, Dennis. This is where I give you your presentation for the next class. This is my definition of hybrid warfare. No one likes it because, of course, that whole nature of war, enduring, violent, right, physical, a duel, and also policy. But from a Kautilyan perspective, warfare is really statecraft. Using all these instruments, including diplomats and spies, as warriors. So, therefore, this is my definition of hybrid warfare. There are a lot of other ones out there. And in what I've written thus far in this book, the tactics of hybrid warfare are as many as you can imagine. Now, I have put a number of them up there. I'm not reading them to you. You can read for yourself. But you can see each one of them is a present-day example. Each one of them. You can see China, Russia, the United States, Iran. I mean, you could pick the country, and you can put it against, in multiple cases, it's multiple countries up there. Okay, the building islands from the sea, that's a Chinese thing. But for the rest of them, many of those are being done by many actors in the world. But especially, they're being done by the Russians under the so-called Gerasimov Doctrine, and the Chinese under the so-called unrestricted warfare theory from the 1990s. Now, there's many more things that I could write. Kautilya didn't know about submarines and building islands and cyber, but all of these would fit into his theory. He writes about sending agents to spread rumors, what we might call fake news. He writes about, as I've mentioned, assassination, targeted assassination, killing. He writes about trying to undermine a country's economy, spoil their crops, which in those days was, kind of the economy, right? He writes about so many of these things using proxies, which is central to hybrid warfare. So I see a linkage in the ancient literature to the present day. I'm not saying that either Valery Gerasimov, a good tank officer, or the Chinese colonels that wrote Unrestricted Warfare, consulted the Arthashastra or even knew of its existence. But I'm saying it's in our collective memory, our understanding of statecraft to use these approaches. Finally, I want to leave you with a quick story. When I first gave this lecture, the room was packed. I mean, I've never seen so many, and there are a couple of 3 or 4 faculty members here. I've never seen so many faculty members come to one of our noontime lectures. It's because they love me. Oh, no, it wasn't for that reason. It was because they all had to teach the class the next day, and they didn't know what the Arthashastra was. Really, it was. The first time we ever taught this, everyone was like, what the heck are we talking about? So they came to the lecture. So I gave them the answers, and then that started the tradition. But at the end of the lecture, I remember sitting back there about where the gentleman in the white shirt is, was the Indian brigadier in that year's class. And at the end of the lecture, one of his seminar mates said, so, I won't say his name, let's say his name was Vijay. So, Vijay, is this guy right? And I remember he said, oh, we don't know Clausewitz in India. Well, actually, parenthetically, he said, we do know Clausewitz. We've studied Clausewitz, but we know Kautilya. And then he proceeded to riff for about 3 or 4 minutes, chapter and verse, endorsing everything I said. So even though it was rude to me, I was pleased with his answer. I'm rude to ask him the question, sort of, hey, is that dude right? And one of the things he said was, I don't even know if you American diplomats know it, you're American diplomats, but the U.S. Embassy is in Chanakyapuri, which is the diplomatic quarter in New Delhi. There's the U.S. Embassy. It's on Chandragupta Street, okay? Over here is Kautilya Street. And the quarter, or the section of the city, is known as Chanakyapuri. So, yeah, we know about Chanakya Kautilya. There's also this new great game going on in and around Afghanistan. It's sort of a modern-day manifestation of the Circle of Kings, the Raja Mandala. All that alphabet soup there is the Pakistani, the Indian, the Iranian, the Chinese, the Russian, the Saudi Arabian, and the United States intelligence agencies, all engaged in silent war, in a Kautilyan sense, right, silent war, covert action in and around Afghanistan. not just in Afghanistan. But there's an old map of Afghanistan from the 19th century in the old Great Game, when there were all these little states or things. They weren't all states, right? In and around Afghanistan. I leave you this to think about, because you're also going to study about geopolitics, that maps are not permanent, right? So even as we talk about getting out of Afghanistan, I came here as an Afghan specialist. We've been talking about getting out of there for a long time now, but we're still talking about it. But even as we talk about it, it's not clear to me that that's what the map of the subcontinent or Central Asia is going to look like, say, in 50 or 70 years' time. And then finally, I leave you with a couple of quotes from the Arthashastra that you won't read, I don't think. And I appreciate your attention. I've tried to give you the full theory as Kautilya expressed it, as I can do anyway in 45 minutes or so. If we've got time, I'll take a question or two. If we don't, we'll send you on your way to strategic softball or whatever else you have today. Thank you very much.